People are drawn to Boston because the city offers a unique mixture of historic preservation and modern vitality. Boston is the smallest of America's major cities, yet it provides an unmatched wealth of experiences. Here, you can discover the roots of a nation's history along the Freedom Trail and the seeds of its future in its leading universities. Antique neighborhoods draw those seeking the genteel charms of the city, and the Boston parks long have set the standard for placing natural beauty in the midst of urban development. In Boston, monuments to the past and future sit joined. It's a city of contrast, where the youthful energy of the world's largest college town provides counterpoint to the mature power of a major technical and financial capital. A unique combination of industry and moral purpose has motivated Bostonians to create one of America's most livable cities. There's a subtle pride in the historic commitment to improving the soul of mankind. This spirit was spawned by the sacred mission of the city's Puritan founders. Back in 1630, John Winthrop, the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, proclaimed of Boston, "We shall be as a city upon a hill, to act as a beacon to all mankind." That same faith has motivated residents down through history. The early Boston colony prospered as the colonial merchants equated doing good with doing well. To them, God bestowed his riches on those he blessed. As this wealth increased, the prosperous colonists raged at the decadent King George of England, who would both limit their trading rights and tax their profits. Their rage grew into a local protest movement that in turn became the holy mission of the American Revolution. And here were fought its first battles. The moral tradition continued, and in the 1830s, Boston spawned abolitionism, the holy cause that led directly to the Civil War. Today, this commitment to moral purpose lives on in the hundreds of universities, medical centers, museums, governmental and cultural institutions that thrive in the region's climate. Yet, for most visitors, Boston is more simply charming. Its tree-lined boulevards and quiet old-world streets make this the most European of all American cities. It's a walking city where you can discover the bustle of a modern urban center, the stately charm of historic neighborhoods, and the best in high culture, all close in on one another. Boston, in short, offers visitor and resident alike a unique American experience. So come along, wander the streets and cobbled alleys, explore the sights of a nation's birth, and discover a wealth of city charms in this, your portrait of Boston. Boston's miniature Central Park is the public garden, one of the city's chief attractions since Victorian times. Here, folks come to feed the ducks, while away an idle hour amid the flowers and the statues, and rediscover the magic of Make Way for Ducklings, Robert McCluskey's beloved children's story. For most visitors, the enduring memory is of the swan boats gliding the garden's central lagoon.
Swan boats are a symbol of Boston, just like the cable car in San Francisco or the Empire State Building in New York City. They were started in 1876 by a man named Robert Paget. Now, he's the grandfather of the current owner. So they've been in the family for 3 generations, and they're going on their 4th generation. Now, it originally started with 2 benches set in front of a paddle box. He didn't get the idea of the swans right away till he saw an opera called Lohengrin, where the prince saves the princess riding on the back of a swan. So he decided to put a swan on the back of the boat, and that's how they were born, and they've been that way ever since for 110 years.
It's easy to think of Boston as a living museum, given all its history and preservation. But this is a dynamic, modern city with all the elements that make any major urban center exciting to explore. Understanding how Boston grew gives a richness to discovering it today. The original city was a bulb-shaped peninsula jutting into the harbor. Its earliest settlements were clustered in today's North End and along the downtown waterfront. As commercial Boston prospered, the Yankee Brahmins undertook civic improvements to fill in the Back and South Bays, creating two wholly new neighborhoods in the South End and Back Bay. Of course, today's Boston was built by many more hands than those of the old Brahmins. By the mid-19th century, waves of immigrants arrived and took up residence in the old sections of town as the better people moved into these newly formed Back Bay and South End neighborhoods. Each new culture has placed its unique stamp upon the city, creating a wealth of ethnic legacies and a cosmopolitan feel. Each group tended to land in its own separate neighborhood. A common truism of life in Boston, one every visitor should keep in mind, is that to truly know Boston, one must remember that this is a city of neighborhoods. The classic Boston neighborhoods are South Boston and Dorchester. These are the homes of the Boston Irish, certainly the best known of Boston's immigrants and for a long time a downtrodden minority. But then the Irish produced a line of mayors of Boston stretching back over 100 years. The most famous of them was James Michael Curley, the Rascal King, who loved tweaking the nose of the old Yankees. So popular was he that he once served for a time as mayor from a federal prison cell. Italians, too, have their own Boston identity. The Old North End is a primarily Italian neighborhood. It's a place to come for good eating, with its wealth of Italian restaurants, bakeries, and the richness of its street life. Many summer visitors to the city delight in wandering one of the North End festas. Each of these celebrations, sponsored by one of the local parish societies, begins with veneration of the patron saint. There's always music, lots of food, and sometimes inexplicable rituals to delight the eye. The central event of the festas always is the procession of the patron saint. Lesser-known neighborhoods also make the city special. Jamaica Plain, a kind of multi-ethnic semi-suburb, and Roxbury, the principal African-American neighborhood. And Boston is even one of the few cities with a real Chinatown. For the in-town neighborhoods and the historic features, a trolley tour is as good a way as any to get an overview of all the famous sites. But sooner or later, you have to get off the trolley and begin to explore the city at a more intimate level, best done on foot. wander down some of the smaller streets, explore the old buildings, and uncover a whole set of special memories all your own. The most walkable and best known of all of Boston neighborhoods is Beacon Hill. Known, if for no other reason than located at the bottom of the hill, is the Bull and Finch Pub, better known to all as Cheers. This area, originally named Tri-Mount, was the highest spot visible from Boston Harbor. The early colony kept a signal fire burning at the summit, thus the name Beacon Hill. Just after the Revolution, the top of the hill was leveled to begin the filling in of the Back Bay. On land donated by John Hancock that lay atop the remaining portion of the hill was erected a new State House designed by Charles Bulfinch, architect as well of the U.S. Capitol in Washington. Seat of Massachusetts government, the State House is an architectural treasure and home to an unlikely collection of statuary, honoring not only political leaders and war heroes, but also religious martyrs as well. Just across the street is the famed Robert Gould Shaw Monument to the first Army Corps ever composed of African Americans. This was the Union Army's 54th Regiment, celebrated in the movie Glory. Beacon Hill itself was home to one of the country's earliest free African American communities, and today has its own Black Heritage Trail. But for most people, Beacon Hill is the neighborhood of the Boston Brahmins, the proper Bostonians whose stuffy superiority provides one of America's enduring cultural stereotypes. The real Beacon Hill is one of the city's most pleasant and friendly neighborhoods. Residents take great pride that the streets still are lighted by gas lamps and that their quiet neighborhood is nestled in the heart of the city. Here, you can explore historic streets and cobbled alleys. There's Lewisburg Square, Mount Vernon Street, and innumerable quiet lanes and intimate doorways offering the hill's quaint charm and distinctive sense of understated elegance. The main street of Beacon Hill is Charles Street, where those in the know come to shop for antiques.
Historians said that Beacon Hill is probably the area where antiques started originally in America. And it's wonderful being around history. And it's so special to have an antique shop on Beacon Hill because you just, every day when you're walking to work, you feel like you're really in history. You know, it's just so perfect to be selling old things in an old neighborhood that has so much charm.
Besides its charm and its history, Boston is also known as a sports town. This is home to some famous, if not always, winning teams. The Red Sox still play ball at Old Fenway Park that dates back to 1912 and is among the last of America's classic ballparks. And the Boston Celtics long have had a special place in the hearts of Boston sports fans. Given Boston's moral traditions, it's hardly surprising that amateur sports also play a key role in the life of the city. Every year when Patriots' Day is celebrated around about the 19th of April, the Boston Marathon is run. This is one of America's premier amateur events, and the whole city turns out to cheer on the runners. For many of these thousands of athletes, simply to have run Boston is a lifetime badge of honor. Boston hosts as well the world's largest rowing event each year in mid-October. The annual Head of the Charles Regatta lures rowers from all over the world in the same way that the Boston Marathon attracts international runners. And again, it's the joy of the amateur athlete that's celebrated here. And at a time when the city is at its most glorious. Not all of Boston's neighborhood attractions are known for their sedate charm or historic ambiance. There's a gritty side to the city, too. The best of it can be found each Friday and Saturday in Haymarket, the open-air market near City Hall.
Right here. Taste the town, baby. We got the best. Mango tree for $2. Step right up there. Look at the mango. Get him while he's bagging.
They used to sell hay here. That's why they call it Haymarket.
75.
Apparently, all the peddlers started bringing in fruit and, you know, without the vegetables and
Everybody comes down here to save a nickel and a dime, and it's worth it on some of the produce that people buy down here.
Hey, Sussy! Oh, they're ready to eat. Hey, Sussy!
What's a beat, lady? What's a beat? Nice fowl, lady, here. Nice fowl, 59 cents a pound. 59.
People from all over the country come here. Even visitors from New York, New Jersey. I've seen people here from Florida. I asked them where they were from. Yeah. They said they liked the bargains here. You know, you can't beat it.
My grandfather was here. My father was here. It's been a family business for years.
It's been known for the last 60, 70 years they've been here. People selling fruit, produce, anything, flowers, fish. It's more of a social activity. People come down, they mingle, buy cheap.
Hi, I'm Ranger George Smith, a park ranger with Boston National Historical Park. Every day, rangers take visitors along a 2.5-mile walk through Boston, the famous Freedom Trail. On the Freedom Trail, we feature two stories. One is the 200-year-old story from the Revolution itself. And of course, we also feature a 360-year-old story from the founding of Boston in 1630. Our walk begins on Boston Common, today a very lovely Central Park. But when this was laid out in 1634, it was common land, where citizens were allowed to graze their cattle. They also drilled the militia here, and on special occasions, they hanged pirates and other criminals. At the northeast corner of Boston Common, also known as Brimstone Corner, stands the very tall and lovely Park Street Church. It was here on the 4th of July, 1829, that William Lloyd Garrison made his first speech in favor of the abolition of slavery. It was here that he made his famous phrase, "I will be heard." 2 years later, at the same location, also on the 4th of July, the first public performance of the famous hymn, "My Country 'Tis of Thee," also called America. Just a few steps from Boston Common on the Freedom Trail, we have Boston's third oldest graveyard, the Granary Burial Ground. This graveyard is unique in America. Nowhere else will you find buried 3 signers of the Declaration of Independence. Here we have John Hancock, Samuel Adams, Robert Treat Paine. Also buried here, the great patriot hero, Paul Revere, and the 5 victims of the Boston Massacre. But this is more than a graveyard. In many ways, it's a colonial art museum. The Puritans who were buried here considered themselves and called themselves saints. And they had many beautifully carved stones to mark their burial places. The most common motif, in the earliest years especially, was the skull with wings. This signified the fact that the soul had to be prepared at any moment to fly off and receive one's heavenly reward. Old South Meeting House in colonial days was the largest meeting room in Boston, as well as being a wonderful house of worship for the colonial Congregationalist Church. It was here in December of 1773 that protest meetings against British taxation were held, specifically against the tea tax. Recently, 3 shiploads of tea had arrived in Boston, and they were docked at Griffin's Wharf at Boston Harbor. It was here on the evening of December 16th that over 7,000 people were both in the building and around it. It was from here that messages were sent. Please send the tea back. The response came, no, that tea will be unloaded this evening. When Samuel Adams, on the pulpit, received that message, he looked at the crowd and said, "There is nothing more this meeting can do for the country." That being the signal for a number of gentlemen dressed as Mohawk Indians to run down to Griffin's Wharf.
The Boston Tea Party ship is a full-scale replica of one of the 3 ships that the Patriots actually dumped tea off of. It is the Brig Beaver. Folks can come on board and they can actually relive the experience of dumping tea. We have them play the part of the angry townspeople. Hopefully we get them riled up so that they can vote to dump tea into Boston Harbor, and they go aboard the ship and dump tea into Boston Harbor. They can also explore down through the ship, and they go home with a free cup of tax-free tea.
Across from the Old South Meeting House is the Globe Corner Bookstore, also called the Old Corner Bookstore. It was at this site throughout the 1800s where operated the publishing firm of Ticknor and Fields. It was Ticknor and Fields that published the great works of American literature throughout the 1800s, works by Hawthorne, Emerson, Thoreau. Here at what is still one of the busiest intersections in Boston, the corner of State and Congress Streets, the site of the Boston Massacre, the famous Revolutionary riot of March 5th, 1770. It is here, from innumerable alleyways that evening, that crowds of Bostonians did come to confront a line of redcoat troops, exactly here. These troops had double-loaded their weapons with lead balls, and yet the crowd came very close. They were very brazen. The Bostonians had never been shot at before in this town. But then, in a mixture of confusion and anger, the redcoats fired directly into the mob, killing 5. Within a few days, Samuel Adams would arrange for all 5 victims of the massacre to be buried in one tomb. It is very appropriate that the massacre should take place here because we are right beneath the very symbols of the royal authority, the lion and the unicorn. Also seen here is the balcony of the royal governor himself. Ironically, within a few years, in July of 1776, the Declaration of Independence would first be read to the citizens of Boston from this balcony. A crowd of citizens also gathered here. It was on that day that the lion and the unicorn were ripped from this building, and a huge bonfire would be created here on the very site of the massacre, a bonfire of the lion and the unicorn. Here, looking down Marshall Street, we are in one of Boston's oldest neighborhoods, Blackstone Block. Here are preserved the ancient street patterns, and we have such wonderful old street names as Scott Alley, Salt Lane, and Creek Square. It's down Marshall Street that stands the Ebenezer Hancock House. Ebenezer, John Hancock's brother, served for a time as paymaster of the Continental Army, and George Washington's troops were paid here. Here we find many architectural details dating from the pre-revolutionary era, most noticeably the 12/12 windows that dot many of these homes. Here also in the Blackstone Block, visitors will find the famous Boston Stone, dated 1737. It is purported to mark the exact geographic location of the center of Boston. In actual fact, it is an advertisement from the colonial days, an advertisement for the equally famous Boston Stone Tavern.
The real meeting places of the Revolution were not held in public places or town halls. They were usually held in the bars and taverns of Boston. Now, that time there was a tavern here in Boston with the primary meeting place of the Sons of Liberty, and that was called the Green Dragon Tavern. Now, the Green Dragon Tavern was located about 50 yards where I sit right now. We brought back the feeling of the Revolution, and we brought it back to its rightful place on the Freedom Trail.
There is no more appropriate location for a statue of Samuel Adams than here, outside Faneuil Hall. In the colonial days, Faneuil Hall was the townspeople's meeting room, and the Boston Town Meeting was Samuel Adams's forum. Samuel Adams is often called a man of the town meeting. For a dozen years, through Stamp Act protests, through the massacre memorials, through the Tea Party, it was Samuel Adams who controlled events on the streets of Boston and in the public meetings that took place here in Faneuil Hall. Faneuil Hall is often called a cradle of liberty. It is here that the rhetoric, later expressed in the Declaration of Independence, was first uttered in public forum. Using such great orators as Dr. Warren and James Otis, Samuel Adams had here expressed the sentiments that he wanted the British and the rest of the American public to hear. This building through it all served also as the Boston Meat Market, and it continues upstairs to be a prominent meeting room for presidential candidates, for swearing in of new American citizens, and for protest meetings of all types. Here we are in the north end of Boston, once a very fashionable neighborhood, and it was to this neighborhood in 1770 that Paul Revere moved with his family. He was a blue-collar worker, but he was a prominent silversmith as well.
We're particularly proud of the Revere House because it's the oldest remaining survival of 17th century Boston, and we think that's pretty important in a city that's changed so much. We also see it as a reflection of the North End neighborhood. The Paul Revere House is very special, and I think people find it interesting. They walk in and they're immediately immersed in something that's different from the modern. But it has a sense that modern buildings don't have, and I think people are immediately aware of that change in atmosphere when they come to visit. The Paul Revere House as a museum is significant because it has a lot of wonderful artifacts. Some reflect Paul Revere's time in the house, and some reflect its time as an early 17th century home.
Here in Boston's North End, just a few streets from the Paul Revere House, we have the tall, graceful steeple of Old North Church. Paul Revere arranged to have placed in that steeple a two-lantern signal on the evening of April 18, 1775. These lanterns would warn of a British advance toward Lexington and then Concord. Paul Revere has taken it upon himself to warn the countryside of the British advance. His famous midnight ride is here commemorated by the statue of Paul, still on horseback.
Old North Church is Boston's oldest church building, having been built in 1723. And while we are famous for two lanterns in the steeple on April 18, 1775, that set in motion the American War for Independence, we still think of ourselves primarily as a house of prayer. There are services through the week as well as 3 on Sunday, and of course it's a delightful place to be married. And many weddings take place here in the evening because we are only lighted by candlelight. One of the highlights of the year, of course, besides the worship, is the annual reenactment of the lighting of the lanterns, which takes place in April every year. And the two lanterns are carried to the steeple by a descendant of Robert Newman, who was the man who actually displayed the lanterns. He was the church sexton. However, we do host 500,000 people annually because of those lanterns in the steeple.
Virtually in the shadow of the steeple of Old North Church, we have the very lovely Copp's Hill Burial Ground, where we find here the tallest marker, grave marker in the yard, the tomb of Captain Daniel Malcolm, a friend to the public and enemy to oppression. And thus on their way to the Battle of Bunker Hill, certain British Redcoat soldiers did take a little bit of firing practice on the tombstone of Captain Daniel Malcolm. They may not have been great marksmen, but they managed to hit this stone 3 times. Boston's Freedom Trail continues over to the battle site and the Bunker Hill Monument, the scene of the Battle of Bunker Hill. It was on June 17, 1775, that Bunker Hill experienced the first true pitched battle of the Revolution. The British may have won the hill that day, but they suffered so many killed and wounded that they never fought in Boston or New England again. Our ranger-led walking tours end here at Copp's Hill. The next time you're in Boston, we hope you may join us in person along Boston's Freedom Trail.
For visitors and residents alike, the Boston Park system is one of the most memorable charms of the city. The emerald necklace, centerpiece of the system, stretches in a virtually unbroken chain from the center of town at the Public Garden, up Commonwealth Avenue to the Fens. There it turns to the south, winding its way out along the Riverway to Jamaica Pond. Included in the necklace is the unique Arnold Arboretum, a collection of trees from all over the world that to many Bostonians is among the city's most captivating treasures. The emerald necklace ends at spacious Franklin Park, designed as its crown jewel. The genius behind the necklace was Frederick Law Olmsted. Many of the finest parks in America were designed in the Olmsted firm's office in Brookline, now a National Historic Landmark.
Many people know Frederick Law Olmsted as the founder of American landscape architecture and also for his work in New York's Central Park, the first large urban public park in this country. However, many do not know that here in Brookline, Massachusetts, Olmsted went on to design public park systems throughout the country. Here at the site in Brookline, we preserve the offices where the Olmsted firm, including Olmsted Sons, designed public and private spaces throughout the United States. This is a recreation of the storage of the Olmsted plans. There are about 150,000 working drawings in our collection, and this is a recreation, an example of what was one of 3 floors in the vault filled with drawings and plans that cover nearly 5,000 landscape projects all over the country. Beginning in 1878 and continuing until 1895, one of the biggest projects this firm undertook was the Emerald Necklace in Boston, a 7-mile continuous green belt winding its way from Boston Common all the way out, ending at Franklin Park. This continuous series of ponds, parks, and parkways was to provide open space for city inhabitants, fresh air, clean water, large meadows, a pond, a place to walk around, a place to dream, a place to imagine, a place to escape the rigors of the city. And perhaps more important than the park system itself, it set the stage for many more ambitious park systems across the United States. So here, looking at about 100 years of Olmsted work, we see Boston to become one of the most important park systems in the country.
From John Winthrop's early promise that we should stand as a city upon a hill, Boston has been serious about its role as an instigator and preserver of the American intellectual heritage. The Puritan belief in building institutions catering to the needs of the soul rather than to those of the body is one of the city's enduring traditions. By the mid-19th century, Boston's universities, museums, musical institutions, and works of public betterment were so many and so diverse that residents modestly began calling their city the Athens of America. This history is ongoing. Even today, Bostonians are driven by the belief that it is one's duty to improve the intellectual and moral life of one's fellow man. This is the world's largest college town, with over 100 colleges and universities within the metropolitan area. Of course, there's Harvard. Founded in 1636, Harvard is considered to be the oldest university in America, and it remains the nation's uncontested source of academic authority. The quiet walkways of Harvard Yard provide splendid isolation from distractions outside the gates. It's so reserved that, contrary to the popular saying, no one ever parks the car in Harvard Yard. Just down the Charles is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Although one of the area's newer schools, MIT is an international mecca for those on the cutting edge of science and technology. No ivory tower, it's an eminently practical place, one of the world's leading incubators of corporate technology. Across and up the river is Boston University, one of the city's largest schools on a campus with a decidedly urban feel. While over on Huntington Avenue is Northeastern, the largest private university in America. And these are only a few of the area's better-known institutions of higher learning. Boston's preeminent place in American, even world, medicine dates back to Massachusetts General Hospital's first use in surgery of ether as an anesthetic, and continues today in the city's many teaching hospitals. Harvard Medical School and its associated medical area hospitals have taken over a whole neighborhood that even so is only one of the city's 4 major medical centers. The libraries of Boston are another source of pride in the city's ongoing crusade to improve the intellectual lot of mankind. In Copley Square, the Boston Public Library stands as something of a secular church with its imposing Beaux-Arts facade. And one of the country's newer libraries is the John F. Kennedy Library and Museum on the Harborfront. The churches of Boston are the most obvious reminders of the city's commitment to works of the soul. First among them are the great churches of Copley Square with their Romanesque grandeur and opulent stonework. Trinity Church's first pastor, Philip Brooks, had the notable dual virtues of both being born in Boston and dying in Boston. Perhaps Boston's most famous church is the Mother Church of Christ Scientist. The surrounding Christian Science complex offers perhaps the city's finest example of a creatively designed modern urban space. Improvement of the public taste has long been a key part of Boston's mission. Establishment of museums and cultural showcases has assured public access to a wealth of artistic treasures. The Boston Museum of Fine Arts is the grande dame of the city's treasure houses. As Boston merchants return bearing Oriental bounty from their success in the China trade, and local Yankees enjoyed substantial wealth from their mills and banks, the city found itself in possession of one of the world's greatest collections of European and Asian paintings and sculpture. The Museum of Fine Arts was built to house this wealth, along with the works of America's own artists of the 18th and 19th centuries. Today, the MFA, as it's known locally, is one of the country's outstanding museums. Visiting it, you can enjoy a range of art rich in the mysteries of ancient Egypt, the magic of the Impressionists, the serenity of a classic Japanese garden, and the stark energy of modern abstractionists. Lovers of the arts, both fine and idiosyncratic, are drawn to the city's most unexpected museum, the Gardner. This eclectic collection was assembled by Isabella Stewart Gardner, eccentric wife of a Boston shipping magnate. It's housed in what was once an Italian castle that Mrs. Gardner had taken apart and moved here to Boston and reassembled brick by numbered brick. And new museums are being created all the time. Rather than treasure houses, the newer museums in Boston are more exploratoriums designed to stimulate a sense of inquiry. The largest of these is the Boston Museum of Science, where exhibits introduce all aspects of science from the age of dinosaurs to the age of space. Some of the exhibits are personally absorbing, and others are literally shocking. Parents claim to be providing enrichment for their children when they visit the Museum of Science. But it's as fascinating for them as it is for the kids. Practically in the center of the downtown financial district is a living museum, the New England Aquarium, located on the waterfront and featuring daily marine shows and endlessly absorbing interior exhibits. On Museum Wharf is a world-famous children's museum with still more exploration exhibits. Also on Museum Wharf is Boston's Computer Museum, honoring the city's more recent high-technology tradition. Of all the arts, Boston is known for its music. The Boston Symphony is among the country's leading orchestras. Most of the BSO's concerts occur at famous old Boston Symphony Hall, one of America's most highly regarded classical music concert halls. Famous Boston Pops plays not only at Symphony Hall, but each summer includes in its schedule a series of concerts held outdoors at the Hatch Shell on the Esplanade. This continues the legacy of Arthur Fiedler, one of the most revered of all Boston musical figures. And Boston's theaters still serve up early introductions to plays destined for Broadway. The arts in Boston have a modern celebratory face as well. Local artists created the country's first night celebration of public art for New Year's Eve, 1976. The tradition continued and grew. Today, more than 100 cities have copied Boston's model. From its lively opening parade to the fireworks at midnight, First Night has become another enduring symbol of Boston's commitment to the arts and to the public good. One of Boston's most popular attractions is the Federal-era warship, the USS Constitution, known as Old Ironsides, because enemy cannonballs were said to have bounced off her thick oak sides. Today, the Constitution is the oldest commissioned ship in the United States Navy. The Constitution is berthed in the old Charlestown Navy Yard. Next to the ship is the Constitution Museum, housing many exhibits on the background and history of the vessel. These exhibits add a new dimension to the experience of taking one of the daily tours on board.
This ship is the USS Constitution. She's the oldest fully commissioned warship floating in the world today. Being fully commissioned means she's part of the United States Navy. Everyone on board, just like myself, is an active duty Navy sailor. This is a special guard that's placed on here to show the public what it's like to work and live on a ship back in the 1800s. On October 21st of 1797, she was launched. She fought in 3 wars. She fought in the Quasi-Wars against France. She fought the Barbary Pirates of North Africa from 1803 to 1807, Tripoli. And then she fought her most famous battles, the War of 1812 against the British. Top deck that you're now standing on is called the spar deck. It got that name because all of the yards, lines, and rigging overhead were collectively known as spars. From this deck, they control all the sails. The guns on this deck, the shorter guns, which we have 20, are called carronades. They were designed in Cairn, Scotland, and forged in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They fire a 32-pound shot, 400 yards. They had a 4 to 9 man gun crew who could just about hit anything they were aiming at. Now this ship, the reason she's so strong, there's no iron on the sides. There's 21 inches of live oak wood all the way around the outside of the ship. Give an idea of how heavy the ship is. On the other side of the pier we have the Cass and Young. It's a decommissioned World War II destroyer. Now it's made of metal, 170 feet longer than this ship, and it has armor plating on the sides. The Constitution outweighs it by 150 tons. This area of the ship, from the mainmast aft, this is called our quarterdeck, officer's country. The only time an enlisted man's allowed up here is if he's on the helm, on a gun crew, or up in the rigging. Now each of these masts, midway up them, we have the fighting tops. During a battle, 7 Marines will go on each top, 6 loaders and a sharpshooter. They'd fire muskets down on the other ships trying to hit a powder monkey or an officer if they could get a good shot at him. The Guerriere fired this first. When it did, the cannonballs bounced off the sides and fell into the water. Now one of the men on the ship cried out, "Huzzah, boys, her sides are made of iron." And that's where she got her nickname, Old Ironsides. Now the name stuck throughout the years because she's been through 42 battles and 3 wars. Never lost a fight. An enemy's cannonball never breached her side, and an enemy's foot never made it to her deck. That's why you still have her in the United States Navy today under full commissioning, with probably the best record of any of the ships that fought back in the sailing ship days.
The Back Bay is one of Boston's newer neighborhoods. As the name implies, the area was all underwater until the middle of the 19th century. Effluent flowing into this back bay forced city fathers to deem tidal flats a health hazard. and to determine that filling in the bay would improve the city's quality of life. The plan had the added attraction of creating more valuable real estate near to the center of a rapidly growing city. Construction of the Back Bay neighborhood was one of America's first great civic improvements. Today, the neighborhood sports street on street of brownstone row houses, many of them in the ornate style of the Victorian era. Here you'll find some of the straightest streets in town, and one European-style boulevard, Commonwealth Avenue. The grand houses along the avenue were long considered Boston's most exclusive addresses. In the center of the mall along the avenue are statues commemorating many of the great civic figures of the last 2 centuries. To really experience the grace and charm of Commonwealth Avenue, you should see it in spring when the magnolias are in bloom. Newbury Street is the other famous street of the Back Bay. This is Boston's most exclusive shopping street with international boutiques and shops catering to exclusive clientele. And it's one of the best places to go for outdoor cafes and people watching. Copley Square is the central square of the Back Bay, where you find the Boston Public Library and the famed Trinity Church sitting cheek by jowl with the Hancock Building. The Back Bay also is home to a couple of Boston's most famous icons, the Hancock Building and the Prudential Tower. These skyscrapers, looming over quiet Victorian streets, tend to show up in most of the area's cityscapes. Although the Back Bay was largely filled in, one large body of water remains, the Charles River Basin. The riverfront park here, known as the Esplanade, serves as locale for much of Back Bay residents' leisure time. It's a place everyone should walk for a key element in the Boston experience. One of the best-known sites in town is Faneuil Hall Marketplace. This exciting reconstruction of a dilapidated commercial section into a modern festival mall was one of the first urban renovations of its kind. Lower Faneuil Hall and the Quincy Market had been the central Boston meat market since colonial times. The mid-70s creation of this unique Center City Mall was a turning point in Boston's Renaissance. Today, the market, with its constant attractions of food and shops, is the city's premier tourist attraction. It's said that the number of daily visitors in season exceeds that of Disneyland.
This building, Faneuil Hall, was built in 1742. This building over here was built in 1826. And both of them are historic buildings, and they carry a lot of information that people should know about if they're going to actually know what went on in the country.
Most people from away tend to lump together the areas surrounding a city with the sights and attractions inside city limits. This is equally true of Boston. To fully appreciate the richness and flavor of Boston, you should explore a few notable sites in its suburbs. Take the history of the Revolution. The downtown Freedom Trail runs through the sites of old Boston. But in another sense, the Freedom Trail only starts in Boston and winds its way out to the towns of Lexington and Concord. There you'll find the sites that comprise the Minuteman National Historic Park. Part of this park runs along the route of the famous ride of Paul Revere in April 1775, the same one used by British soldiers marching out to capture Patriot armaments. The British marched onto Lexington Green at dawn on April 19th. Here, they met a small band of local militia. The first shots of the revolution were fired and a couple of patriots died. But the greatly outnumbered Minutemen retreated and the British marched on. The next town to the west, Concord, was the English objective because of the revolutionary militia's powder and armaments stored there. Forewarned, Minutemen from Concord and surrounding towns gathered at the Old North Bridge. As the poem goes, by the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled, here once the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world. In the ensuing battle, many British and Americans were killed. The American Revolution had begun. Each year on the anniversary of this engagement, the battle is reenacted on the original site, here at the Old North Bridge. Today, the site is as much holy ground as is imaginable in our secular democracy. Concord holds another distinction. In the 19th century, it was the center of American literature. Here, you can find the homes of Emerson, Hawthorne, the Alcotts, and here, too, is Walden Pond, where Henry David Thoreau retreated for the year chronicled in his famous book, Walden. To the north is another fascinating historic site, the old Saugus Iron Works. Built in 1650, this was the first heavy industrial site in the American colonies, where local iron was processed and smelted. Throughout the warm weather, this fascinating reconstruction provides working demonstrations of an important piece of local history. Just to the south of Boston, in Quincy, is another historic site, the Adams Homestead, home to two American presidents, John Adams and John Quincy Adams. Yet another presidential home is in Brookline, site of the birthplace of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. The most popular destination outside Boston proper lies just across the river in Cambridge. Many visitors think the two cities are one, but Canterbridgians will be quick to tell you how different their city really is. Cambridge has its own set of historic sites. Great colonial homes along Brattle Street, known in the Revolutionary era as Tory Row, include a house where both George Washington and Henry Longfellow once slept. But in truth, Cambridge's central attraction isn't historic but contemporary. It's the street life of Harvard Square. The square is one of the leading centers of student culture in America. It's an ever-changing theater, concert, and dining hall. Summer evenings or Saturday and Sunday afternoons are the best times to explore this scene. You could find anything. Boston is a city on the water. Its fortune was made because its large deep-water port, set back and protected from the open ocean, was perfectly located to make this the hub of Northeast sailing trade. Easy access to New England's fisheries, forests, and factories made Boston a natural center for shipping and shipbuilding. The great clipper ships sailed from Boston. The great ship Flying Cloud was launched in East Boston. For almost 3 centuries, this was one of the trade capitals of the Americas. From the age of the tall ships to the present, Boston has had a special relationship with the sea. The relationship has been celebrated recently in a couple of spectacular tall ships extravaganzas hosted by the city, gracing the harbor with classic sailing ships from around the world. You truly discover Boston when you see it from the water. A good bet is to take one of the harbor cruises along the waterfront and out among the islands. Here you discover the fascinating story of Boston Harbor. This story begins at the harbor's entrance where, on Little Brewster Island, you find Boston Light. Boston Light was America's first lighthouse and now has the distinction of being the last manned lighthouse in the country.
This is Boston Light. This is the first light constructed this side of the Atlantic Ocean. It was put up in 1716 by the British, and it was blown up in the Revolutionary War, 1776. And then it was put back up in 1783 by order by Governor John Hancock. It was erected again, and then it was relit. Being a lighthouse keeper is a really different job. There's nothing else like it. You wake up out here and you're already at work, don't have a busy schedule. A typical day is we send weather to NOAA, weather reports, barometric pressure, sea state, air temperature, wind direction, all that. We send that starting at 6 o'clock in the morning and every 3 hours up until 6 at night. And about 15 minutes, 20 minutes after sunrise, we go up and we cover the light. We cover the light with the curtain so the Fresnel lens doesn't refract the light and burn out the bulb. And if fog sets in during the day, then you might go up at noon and turn the light back on if fog sets in. So it's just kind of just hanging out and making sure ships don't hit the rocks. The lens is 336 individual prisms laid into a frame with plaster of Paris. It was installed in 1853. This lens was here. The bulb inside is a 1,000 watt, and the lens refracts the bulb into 1.8 million candle power. It's visible for 27 miles at sea on a flat, calm, clear night. One by one, they just stopped having people with the lights. And this light, just because of its historical value, is manned now and will remain manned. And whoever's out here, the three of us here now are the last keepers. As every time we're replaced, whoever comes out is the last keeper in the United States.